In this video, I want to dive deeper into the transcendent regions of the brain, those portions of the brain which transcend identity, and the identity being the habitual pattern of thoughts, feelings, action, and words. The identity of the ego being a microcosm in some way of the cult in which it operates. The transcendent experience, the transcendent region of the brain, is that part of the brain which lifts out and moves beyond the bounds of identity. And every cult and every identity, every pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, and action has an intelligence quotient. Now, the intelligence quotient of any system can be measured by the sustainable well-being that it yields relative to the energy it consumes to reveal or to produce that level of well-being. And so common areas or common domains, these are broken up by language into subcategories. We have things like sleep, sex, hobbies, diet, work, dreams, meditation, social interaction. It's a loop, and then the loop repeats, making it an identity, making it a pattern. And statistical data reveals the amount of sustainable well-being, financially, emotionally, mentally, physically, that a given pattern, a given identity produces. So in this equation, we might have 110 units of energy consumed in sleep. Energy can take the form of time, money, natural resources. Sleep is often a third of our existence, and we consume energy in our housing, etc., to provide a context for sleep. So we might have 110 units of energy expended, 10 units of energy expended for sex. We have an equation of energy going into each of our activities that form our identity. And not all of the equations are positive. We might consume a third of our energy in sleep and have horrible dreams that we don't have the competency to respond to. We might pay a large amount in housing costs that we don't appreciate. So the amount of well-being that comes out of any system of energy consumption is the net of the positive experiences minus the negative experience, and this gives you a yield. Much like a business, if you were to set up this system as a company, you would say that dealing with this customer in this product delivers $100,000 in revenue, dealing with this customer with this product yields $20,000 in revenue, etc., etc., and you would get a gross revenue. The gross energy consumption being measured in this case primarily in a financial dimension by expenses, but realistically any business does not just have, a line item for wages, for hiring staff. It also has the time of those people. All of those people are spending time doing things, packing those boxes, manufacturing those materials. So there's a number of hours, human hours, that are consumed producing the product and shipping the product and packaging and marketing the product. But there's also the time driving to the production site. So you have time, and then there's all the gasoline consumed in the vehicles as people drive to their job site. So you have time, you have money, you have natural resources. Those packaging boxes don't just come from nowhere. They may come from trees or from shipping recycled packaging around and around. It still consumes gasoline running the recycling factories, which has an impact on the environment. But you can grasp the idea that any system, that any identity, be it a company, be it an individual, be it your life, has a system of inputs, of energy, time, money, natural resources, attention, thought, emotion. These are inputs. And the output is the yield of sustainable well-being. So in this system, where we have some profits, we have some negatives, some profits, some negatives, some profits, we have a total of 657 hypothetical units going into the system. And after you take out the minus, you have a net profit of 174. Now this would be considered in traditional cult terms, a profitable venture, particularly if it's looked at through the eye of the investor. They put $657 of capital up, and they got 174 back on a regular basis. That could be weekly, that could be monthly, but that's considered a reasonable return because you've got a 30% return on investment. And within the sociopathic reptilian brainstem programming of fear and desire, so you have desire and you have fear, and you have your core underlying motivation of every human being in the history of humanity has wanted to feel sustainably better, that's the drive, and has wanted to avoid feeling chronically worse. That's the stick, the carrot and the stick. And so even someone trapped in the reptilian brain of fight, flight, and freeze, they're still using that program to try and make their lives better, to meet some degree of their human needs. It may just be through the reptilian brain survival and security, because when you come to level 3 in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, love and belonging, you cannot create or receive love and belonging through the reptilian brain. The reptilian brain, in its fight, flight, freeze, traumatic response mechanism, is not capable of appreciating or processing love, but it can process power, for example, because power correlates to survival and security. If you've got all the guns, if you've got all the money, if you've got all of the popularity or all of the credibility or whatever it is, you've got more influence. And what a reptile uses that influence to do is to increase the odds of their survival and security. Now, a reptile may even become rather broad-minded in the sense of, for example, if you're a billionaire reptile or a millionaire reptile or whatever it is, reptile at the top of your power structure, and you're doing very well because you're using your influence to increase your survival and security. So maybe you have $100 million in the bank. But if your staff, if your employees, if your customers only have $10 in the bank, they can't pay you. And so a reptile has to deal with sustainability at some point, just through the rationale of if we use too much of our influence to take the kings, for example, in France, who, while the peasants were starving, were busy outfitting gold-plated toilet flushers and new marble columns. At some point, the power is always in the majority when it comes to brute force. And so if the majority in unison decides we're not interested in your new marble column, we're interested in the fact that we don't have enough potatoes to eat ourselves, let alone pay the new tax on all crops to funnel money towards the king. So you have a revolution. And so the sociopath, that is an enlightened sociopath, understands that while they always put themselves and their survival and security first, they can't bring it quite to the point where people want to kill them. Otherwise, you don't survive and feel secure. The unenlightened reptile will push this to such an extreme where the king is beheaded. There is a revolution because they're so self-centered and so sociopathic that they're not even thinking about their own future or bothering to study history. That would be stepping outside the moment a little bit too much. The complete reptilian sociopath is 100% in the moment, no interest in past or future, and no interest in anyone else. And that version of sociopathic behavior usually leads to revolt and revolution and change. And the next sociopath to come along is likely to weigh that equation of the recent death and out of fear will treat the people, the employees, their partners, whatever, a little bit better. But a reptile in the reptilian regions of the brain cannot process love or empathy because that part of the brain does not have access. It's a foreign concept. It's a fear-based brain. And so much of capitalism is reptilian. It's designed with greed and fear as the primary motivator. And that is expressed through the shareholders wanting to get the most that they can get. In the 80s, there was a big shift towards the primary job of any company owner was not to take care of the community or the employees or even themselves. It was to put the shareholders first, to have the shareholders, those that didn't do any work but put in some capital, take the most capital out per year, either in increased stock price, in dividends, or in buyout. And so you have a lot of focus on that. At some point, you get revolt and sabotage, disgruntled, unhappy workers, and then the profit dies because it's an unsustainable system to have extreme sociopathic behavior, with no counterbalance in place. So every system has input energy and outputs amount of well-being. And of course, for, whether it was one of the Louis in France that got beheaded, the well-being was just for Louis and a few of the loyal people around. And so you have the amount of net well-being, which can be measured culturally in terms of human needs. How many people in this culture have survival checked off? How many people in this culture have security checked off? How many people in this culture have high levels of love and belonging checked off? How many people have high levels of self-esteem checked off? How many people have high levels of self-actualization, meaning that they've understood their unique talents and gifts and developed them? How many in the culture have brought those gifts meaningfully and honorably? And honorably just means that they've brought those gifts into an environment capable of honoring them. All gifts are honorable, but if you bring a great gift of music or singing into your cult, and your cult lacks the competency to honor it, meaning reptilian brains do not appreciate music. Why would they? Other than maybe as a possession, if they can purchase something that other people want as a power maneuvering lever. But if you bring your gifts into a cult that is incapable of honoring your gifts, you haven't reached that level of human need of having your gifts make a positive difference. And finally, how many people in your cult have reached a place of transcendence. Now, the identity of the cult and the sub-identity of the egos in those cults that have attuned to the pattern and shape of the cult. Square cults create square egos because cults reward individuals for conforming to the status quo, which is the shape of the cult. Whatever the cult is, if you're in Africa, you're rewarded for putting a bigger plate in your lip if you happen to be part of the tribe that ranks status by how big of a plate you can put in your lip, or how many earrings, or how many belts of wampum, whatever it is. Your cult has a ranking system, and you are rewarded not for your intelligence, but you're rewarded for your conformity to the high-ranking topics. Now, every culture has some degree of intelligence or it's dead. And every culture has some degree of sociopathic cruelty, insanity, and stupidity. No system is perfect. So you've got somewhere between, mildly imperfect to drastically imperfect as a system, as a design, and the drastically imperfect systems are dead. And on a planet that has sociopathic individuals in any part of the planet, you have to have some part of your intelligence being a wall against the sociopathic behavior of others. And that also speaks to the vision, meaning the transcendent species, the most intelligent species, focuses on the development through the animal reptilian stage of development to the rational stage, from which you can then pivot into the empathic stage. This is the time when you really hate the person on the other side. You just don't want to be killed by them. And so you act polite at the peace negotiations, not because you feel polite, but because you grasp that having another round is going to kill more of your children. The highly sociopathic person doesn't care and will just manipulate peace treaties, etc., to gain an advantage, much like Hitler did to continually make promises to rebuild his army and then invade again. So as long as you're part of a group that exists on a planet where strong reptilian programming is in effect, then a certain amount of diplomacy and defense, etc., becomes necessary to meet the need to survive. But far more important, in order to move towards full intelligence, there has to be efforts to support the development in the peoples around you, from the reptilian, rational sociopath to the empathic, rational human being. Because engaging with rational, empathic human beings requires far less energy expenditure to create far more levels of net sustainable well-being. If you're intelligent, that's what you want. Meaning if you're intelligent, you grasp that that's what you want. It is what every human being wants at some level. They want to feel sustainably good, and they want to avoid feeling chronically bad. The question is, what's the operating system that they rely on? What is the identity that they rely on in order to get there? And every single human interaction requires an identity. Sitting still and being silent is an identity. You say nothing. You sit cross-legged. You think whatever it is you're thinking while you're sitting there doing nothing. That is an identity. All human interaction requires an identity on both sides to mediate the exchange of energy. It's just that some identities are far more intelligent at creating sustainable well-being with a given amount of energy than others. It's also important to note that it's because identities are linear and mathematical in nature. What I mean by that is if you beat a dog enough, particularly in formative years, it will become highly aggressive, highly sociopathic to survive in a highly aggressive, highly sociopathic environment. That is an equation. Beat a dog enough, and it will vacillate between fight and flight based on an observation of the odds of winning. If it can win, it'll attack. If it can't win, it'll run away. And there's nothing in between a highly abused animal. So in order to bring the animal into a state where there's some sense of empathy and attunement and joyful expression, you cannot beat the dog more than a certain amount. Now, because play and fun and love is a higher state of well-being than suffering and terror and endless aggression, if the dog is treated well again, it will revert back to a more intelligent identity. But if it is abused too much, it may not recover. It may develop such a strong identity as the abused dog that it can't transcend. It can't transcend that identity. It has got it into all of its biology that it is surrounded by sociopaths and that fight and flight are the only things that will keep it alive. And so you've downgraded the potential well-being of that dog to that point. All identities are linear. They're mathematical. You rape a child. You then tell the child to cover up for the abuser. You kowtow to the abuser out of interest of the dignity of the child. That child will develop an identity of worthlessness and start hating the sociopathic environment that leads to its chronic abuse, shame, and dishonor. That's a given. These are mathematical equations. If you add 2 plus 2 plus 2, you get 6. Identities are linear. They come from the past and the anticipated future, which, unless there's some change, some noticeable change, you project the past into the future. So unless someone knows how to treat you in a very different way that breaks through that past programming, you maintain the identity which best allows you to survive and feel some sense of security, which in a sociopathic environment is a sociopathic identity. And so you have this loop going around where the individual reinforces the group by conformity, and the group coerces the individual into adaptation through fear. Because rigid identities, dogmatic rigid identities are not very fun. They don't produce a high yield of well-being sustainably. And so it requires a certain amount of bludgeoning and force to get someone into a fixed identity. The cult is, of course, primarily serving the function of providing stability through maintaining a status quo. So this goes round and round and round. Every single culture, every single country, every single family, every single community expends energy to exist, expends energy called our way of life, whatever that is, and produces a statistical probability field that is mathematically predictable. Meaning if you look at a culture, if you look at a country, and say that, okay, in our culture, for every undereducated child who is raised in a ghetto, there will be 0.5 children in prison. There will be this, and this. You can predict these statistics. And the intelligence of the system can be measured by the amount of energy it takes to produce those statistics. An incredibly dumb culture uses massive amounts of energy chronically to create massive amounts of unnecessary suffering. That's the first part of stupidity. The second part of stupidity comes that they resist change. You go to this culture and say, look, if you spent less money on prisons and more money on education, you'd have the same amount of energy investment, but you'd have much higher levels of well-being. And they say, no, we're not changing anything. This is our way of life. You go to a bully and say you could actually possibly have friends if you treated some of them nicer. Our culture raises maybe 5% of people could be good friends. Meaning maybe 5% of our culture is capable of being an exceptional friend to a good person, but you have to treat them like this. You have to know where they are in the probability field, because we don't teach emotional literacy. We don't teach relational literacy. We don't teach traumatic literacy. We teach shame and chauvinism and might is right. And so that doesn't produce a high yield of expert, qualified potential friends. It produces this yield. And so you have to go through 95 people perhaps to find these 5. Now, that's of course not as intelligent as a cult that, does produce emotional literacy, traumatic repair, healing shame, relational literacy, supports people who are abused, etc., etc. That culture might produce 30% of people who are capable of being exceptional friends. And then if we had postdoctorate degrees in being an exceptional friend, measured by data, it might go up to 95% of the population of those getting this postdoctoral degree of deprogramming from their cult and learning this technology that would then be capable of being an excellent friend. But you've got to shift to start looking for that minority of people. And bullying and humiliating everyone isn't going to do it. So that's a level of intelligence. But if the bully knows how to get the sense of power out of bullying and doesn't ever have any experience of, first of all, they don't have experience that anyone wants anything good for them, because it doesn't usually take more than a few adults who really look out for a given individual before they don't want to bully. They want to be friends. But if you take someone who's never had a trustworthy encounter with power, where they've not seen that wasn't sociopathically based, sure, you gave me this, but because you wanted that, so that you can have more power and be better for you and screw everyone else. So when you approach a bully to say, how about another way of interacting, they're not interested. And if you approach the culture and say, how about raising people other than bullies, they're not interested. Why? This is our way of life. And highly traumatized groups of people are terrified of the unknown. But this is why the transcendent region of the brain is so important, because this loop is going around in your family, in your group, in your marriage, in your country, in your species. It's going around. The group is rewarding these things. A statistical number of people are responding to try and climb the cult rank system. People are conforming to what is rewarded. What's being rewarded is unhealthy. It's a low level of intelligence. And so you get a rather large expenditure of energy for relatively low results. And you can't get a dynamic change in that loop without going outside the system. And the good news is that mathematically, philosophically, theologically, emotionally, on any dimension that you track it scientifically, there are no closed systems in the universe. Meaning this tightly wound cult loop of self-referential behavior is being maintained with effort every day by individuals who are afraid of change and afraid of the unknown. And they're afraid of change and they're afraid of the unknown because the unknown and change has statistically brought them more pain, more shock, more trauma than well-being. Meaning, more often than not, when they come back, their car is not surprised by having ribbons and random well wishes and hugs and kisses, and the shock is someone broke into their car. When they came home, they didn't find the landlord had forgiven 2 months of rent just for fun. They found a penalty because their check got lost in the mail. So change and shock is feared. The devil you know is better than the devil you don't know is a statement that is true for a traumatized group, a traumatized individual, a traumatized culture. And so it's a self-referential loop that works. It yields some degree of well-being, even if it's only certainty. And it consumes a certain amount of energy, and there are winners and losers in that system, and so the effort is to not be one of the losers, to let that be someone else, and that requires sociopathic thinking. You're not thinking of how to change the cult. But mathematically speaking, all systems are linked, meaning I may be sitting out on my deck and feeling low energy. I come into the house and my dog, who I treat pretty well, is so excited to see me, floods me with energy, floods me with aliveness. And his energy gives me the impetus to make this video that I didn't feel like making before all of that excitement was showered on me. It's coming from outside my mental loop. My mental loop was taking me down. Now my biological loop, which includes the enthusiastic playing with my dog, lifts me up. There are no closed systems in the universe. Everything at some level affects everything else at some level. It could be on the electrical dimension, it could be on the gravitational dimension, it could be on the mathematical dimension, the financial dimension, the social dimension. Everything is linked. And this process of transcendence, of moving outside of the loop, is the relationship with the other. The relationship with the other is one of the most profound possibility fields that any system, that any individual will encounter, because the other dwarfs the known. Whatever a human ego can comprehend, can be conscious of, can identify with, is dwarfed by the other. An individual is dwarfed by the 6 billion on the planet. The planet is dwarfed by the estimated more than billion other planets in just our known universe. The universe is dwarfed in the multiverse. The other is always 99.999% bigger than the known. And that's good news, except it's neutral. The other contains horrific surprises, it contains amazing opportunities, it contains healing technology that has yet to be invented, it contains everything that we need to become more intelligent, to shift our system from one that is yielding this level of result per units of energy invested, to a 10-fold, to a 20-fold, to a 30-fold increase in well-being with the same energy invested. All of that lies in the other. That area that every traumatized individual is most terrified of encountering. Now, this is one of the reasons I believe that traumatic literacy and repair is one of the single most intelligent things that any cult can participate in. Now, the other is on many dimensions and can be pursued in many ways. Pets, of course. We just saw the example of Philip shifting state by engaging with something other than my mental loops. Reading, another way of shifting the mental loops within the mental loop system. So if one has the intelligence to read intelligent books, books that yield a higher level of well-being per unit of energy invested, one might heal the mental system, the mental identity of repeated thoughts and words and memories and anticipated futures. If one cannot heal the mind because one lacks the intelligence to repair the system, one can transcend the system by playing with a dog. It's not on a mental level, but after playing around and enlivening endorphins, etc., suddenly the brain just lifts up a little bit and starts thinking more interesting, more enjoyable thoughts. So it's healed by transcending the dimension and switching to a more intelligent physical dimension. Travel. When you travel to completely different cultures, you transcend, particularly if you have an open perspective of understanding them in their own terms, you transcend the box that is your cult as you discover a new box that is their cult. And you discover, if you travel enough, that every cult is really good at doing some things that your cult isn't, and that your cult is good at doing some things that they're not good at doing. So every cult gets something right on some dimension, and every culture is shit at doing other things on other dimensions. So if you travel, you can explore and break down some of the dogmatic rigidity that comes from fear of the unknown by exposure to the unknown. Meditation, one form of inner travel. One of the most powerful mechanisms in meditation is the connection with the transcendent brain, otherwise known as witness consciousness, the one who watches the system. The one who watches the system is not the system, is not in the system. And so understanding that every single system is flawed, it's very valuable to transcend the system by identifying with a part of you that is not in the system. Now you have a separate identity from which to edit the identity. If you're in the film, if you're in the movie, you can't edit the movie. You have to look at the probability field. This character could say this, or could say this, or could do this. I could include this clip, and this clip. I could tell this narrative. That editor is outside the film. It's witness consciousness. And there's more power there to either be stupid, to spend lots of energies creating unnecessary suffering, or to be intelligent, to spend very little energy creating large amounts of sustainable well-being. Imagination is another aspect of that, to imagine a more intelligent system. I get up, I watch the news and get depressed, then I eat this and get a spike in blood sugar, which crashes, then a few hours later, then I suffer through the day in a meeting I'm not interested. And that's my system. That's what I do. Fitting in with a cult where that's what we do. Imagination says, what if I ate this instead? It has a longer energy curve. And what if, rather than saying, what's the news, I asked people how they were doing? Would that change the equation? It would. Would my cult reward me for that, or am I now being unprofessional which is just one of the many cult sanctions waiting to be, lashed out at anyone who isn't conforming. And so what if I went to another company? What if I started my own company? What if I? So imagination is part of the other. Psychedelics. What happens to my mind in a sacred setting where, with the intent of connecting with other and more deeply with myself, because that's the other thing, the other is the unconscious region of the self. When you understand that all energy is mathematically connected, that which is other is that which is unconscious within the framework of human ego consciousness. It's not really other. You're not other. It's not other. But the relationship is unconscious and unknown. And so we're really talking about how big is the sense of self. And of course, if you have ownership of your species and your planet, you're less likely to behave sociopathically in unnecessary circumstances, because that's a part of you as well. Mathematically speaking, that's a part of you as well. Financially speaking, that's a part of you as well. Meaning there is a connection, statistically, between how many people are bankrupted and poor and uneducated in your culture and how well you're doing, statistically. Now, there's anomalies. There's situations where certain people get rich on the poverty of others. But as a general statistic, if your entire economy is trash, it's very difficult for you as an individual to be highly prosperous in a trash economy. The same is true emotionally. If your entire emotional culture is trash, it's very difficult to create and maintain an anomalous high state, because emotions are viral, because money is viral, because all energy, including thoughts, feelings, are viral. Body states are viral. You will, and there's an interesting continuum of dissociation and insanity if you act completely at odds, meaning if children are being shot up in front of you and you're laughing, you are considered insane, because your laughter, while you may be imagining a wonderful vision of world peace, has nothing to do with the kids being shot up around you. And so people can't relate to you because they're not inside your mind. And so rather than get inside your mind, they will label you as insane. And if enough people tell you you're insane, you may believe it as well. But the definitions of insanity are dissociation, mentally, verbally, physically, where the coherence with the outer environment is unrecognizable. So and then they'll lock you up. Why? Because you're not beating to our drum. We'll pathologize your difference. And you have psychedelics, which of course can take you into states that you wouldn't willingly go otherwise. In both positive and negative directions. It's a doorway into other. The other is vast, and the other is neutral. So as one goes into other, one can hit extraordinary pockets of terror and trauma, and you can hit extraordinary pockets of joy, bliss, healing, and well-being. It's all out there. 99.99% of all that is other than us, is other than the known, is other than consciousness. And so everything that we seek and everything that we fear exists in the domain of other. So it requires more and more skill and more mastery to navigate other in a way that yields sustainable well-being rather than increasing chronic suffering. We've decided to ban the other, though, including psychedelics, because we don't like change. Change scares people. It scares the parts of our ego that is in power. It scares the part of the community that is in power, and it scares the national leaders that are in power. because change could topple their hierarchy. Change could topple your own ego's hierarchy. If you're the serious, disciplined, I'm always this way, and that's the person I am, and nobody's going to tell me other, you could take a psychedelic experience and decide that it was more fun to laugh. That laughter is closer to your nature than going around as Mr. Tough Guy. Well, that's confusing. So let's shut it down. Let's disown and dissociate with change. I don't know how to navigate change. So highly intelligent cultures teach navigation of the unknown and regulation of exposure. How much of the unknown do I want to expose myself to? And how do I navigate it more intelligently so that I take the pieces that can bring sustainable well-being to me and those around me and ripple out, and let go of the things that increase chronic suffering around me and those around me and ripple out. God got us all that He is on a theological or religious dimension is part of the transcendent experience. You have the universe refracted through a spiritual lens. If you have a lens, you can see on that dimension. If you have an observing and measuring device, in this case the transcendent regions of the brain, you can have an experience of oneness. And in that totality of that mathematical equation viewed through the transcendent brain, you have the polarity, the masculine and feminine, the yin and the yang. You have the dual, and you have the one that contains it all. God got us all that is. And at the peak of the capacity of the transcendent brain, there is a deep knowing that we are deeply connected with everything else, that we're part of the equation. We're not the equation. We're not all of it. We're a part of all of it. All of it is one with us. We're one with all of it. Now, this vantage point leads to more intelligent behavior. You don't you don't cut down all your trees when you understand that they're a part of you. You don't set up the next generation with trillions of dollars of war debt when you understand they're a part of you. Your children are a part of you. You're a part of your children. You're a part of your culture. Your culture is a part of you. So in this way, you through the duality, masculine and feminine, yin and yang, God and goddess, through the duality you have distinction, you have consciousness through language and distinction. But then you transcend that duality, being aware of connection. Now, you cannot maintain, as a general statistical rule, high levels of transcendent consciousness in a sociopathic cult. The reason for that is that the reptilian brain survives sociopathic behavior better than transcendent behavior. So, if a bunch of people are coming at you with knives, and you're letting go of it all as it's all one, you're dead a few minutes later, and then you're letting go of it. Consciousness dies out in that environment. It doesn't die. Your consciousness goes somewhere else, but it dies out in that environment. And what is left is a message that transcendent consciousness will not be honored and tolerated in this cult, and so it will not exist, statistically speaking. I had a 10-minute moment of it in my 30s. It was just so wonderful, and I've never felt it again since. It's too dangerous. I'm surrounded by reptilian governments here and this, and I don't want to be caught in a transcendent state in a reptilian environment. So I could go there, but I'm not going to. So the most intelligent path of a species evolution, understanding that the transcendent state yields the highest levels of sustainable well-being per unit of energy invested, mathematically speaking, financially speaking, emotionally speaking, mentally speaking. You have an incredible return on investment. The catch is that it has to be done together to some degree, because highly transcendent states, much like orchids in Alaska, do not survive the harsh winters of a sociopathic cult for very long. So you have to use rationality to make your cult less sociopathic, more empathic. You have to use rationality from the reptilian state to say, you know, maybe tiny homes are not such a bad idea and are better than having people homeless on the street because they can't afford $100,000 or $1 million homes. But they could afford and would have a $5,000 tiny house. Maybe passing laws so that everyone is housed will decrease the reptilian vibe. And there'll be more tolerance for healthier identities that move towards transcendence. It's all the other. And through the transcendent brain, the other becomes more a part of us. The value of the other, and the reason that transcendent consciousness, through the healthier side of religion, meditation, psychedelics, imagination, art, and humility, is so powerful, is that you can go dimensionally to other places that influx energy. There is no real closed system. There's just the illusion of a closed system where it just goes round and round and round. You see, the other represents the largest number in the system. We call it 1,000 units right here. The other can bring in 1,000 units. If you'll allow it, that 1,000 units could arrive in a dream. Last night I had a dream about an article that revolutionized my business. Now my conscious brain can't figure out what the article was about. So it obviously doesn't fit into my identity, but it's there. It's telling me there's a probability field to write an article about something that could have a very big positive impact on my life. I just need to figure out what part of me is blocking that awareness so that I can let that in. And bingo, a change occurs. The system changes because the inputs are changing. I'm doing something different than I would have done without that dream. But when dreams are just poppycocks and not to be written down in a cult that is highly materialistic, we don't have dream retrieval training. I don't. You probably don't. If we did, we'd all be having visionary dreams every night, letting the other come in positive ways, and see a radical transformation of our system, much to the dismay of every traumatized individual who's clutching on to the known, fearing that any change is going to kill him. So perhaps violently clutching on to the known. So you have the dimension of other. Having a spirituality is a relationship with the other, with that which is bigger than the self. The ecology, the environment, the global economy, the well-being of the species, the well-being of the planet, a connection to this or that energetic dimension, something bigger than the self. When we own our relationship with the other, in whatever form, mathematically, geometrically, you can follow any field, any distinction, and you can take it to the edge of the known. And then you can recognize how tiny the known is relative to the unknown. And from that jumping off point, be it in geometry, be it in mathematics, be it in physics, be it in economy, be it in relationships. You see, in relationships, the unknown is all around us. Have you ever had a date where you co-created a peak experience? You talked to someone for the first time and said, let's create a peak experience together. I don't care if we see each other again or not. While we're together, let's orchestrate a mutual peak experience. I don't like that at all. Why? You don't want a peak experience? No, I don't want the unknown. What if I failed? I'm afraid of the pain of the unknown. I'm overvaluing my fear in a traumatic cult, and I'm undervaluing the opportunity. They're both there. Most dates are mediocre to horrible. So you don't have much to lose going into the unknown. Or what about an eye-gazing date? Let's get together and eye-gaze and never say a word and pass a few logistical notes back and forth. That's the unknown. I've never done it before. I don't want that either. Well, what do you want to do? Well, why don't we just meet for coffee in a highly noisy environment where it's difficult to get parking, and then I'll sit there and judge you and make up stories about you, and you can sit there and judge me and make up stories about me, and we've all done that thousands of times, so why don't we do that? Why don't we stay in this tiny little 1% of relationship interaction and avoid the 99.9% of the unknown that contains every profound experience I want to have, every dream I want to fulfill? Let's just stay in the known. It's all around us. And the doorway into that is a competent spirituality, is a competent relationship with what is bigger than us, bigger than our culture, bigger than our species. The unknown. The more space we have between stimulus and response, and space is infinite. You take a 1-inch metric, and there is an infinite number of space. The points are known, this point and this point, but how deeply can you go into space? How many subatomic particles exist between here and here? How many trillions of nuances of time exist between 1 second and another second? The space between is always infinite, and it is the doorway into the unknown.